An old man came up to me at the pier and said, "Don't go out to sea today. There's an unpleasant surprise waiting for you in the hold." I thought he was just a senile local legend rambling at the wind. But when I lifted that hatch and saw what my own son had hidden down there, I realized that blood isn't thicker than water. It is just stickier and much harder to wash off your hands. If you enjoy stories about justice being served, family betrayal, and the dark secrets that hide behind white picket fences, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow and share more of these stories. Leave a comment below, predicting what you would do if you found out your own child was trying to frame you for a felony. Would you turn them in or try to save them? Let's get into the story. My name is Mitchell, and I am 72 years old. People look at me and they see a retiree in boat shoes and a windbreaker, a man who spends his days drinking iced tea and watching the tide roll in. They see the benign exterior of a grandfather. They don't see the rebar and the wet concrete that lives inside my soul. They don't know that I built half the skyline of this city with my own 2 hands, starting with nothing but a rusted pickup truck and a shovel in 1974. I have learned a lot of lessons in my 7 decades on this earth, but the most painful one came late in life. It is the lesson that concrete is reliable. Steel is honest. If you pour a foundation correctly, it will hold up the house for 100 years. If you mix the cement right, it won't crack. But people, family, they are organic, they rot, they warp. And sometimes, the very people you built your life around become the wrecking ball that tries to bring it all down. To understand why I was standing on that dock that cold October morning, and why the betrayal cut so deep, you have to understand my son David. And to understand David, you have to understand the empire I built for him to inherit. I own Mitchell Construction. We aren't the biggest firm in the state, but we are the most trusted. I spent 40 years waking up at 4 in the morning, smelling like diesel and dust, missing dinners and birthdays, all to ensure that my family would never know the hunger I knew as a child. I wanted to give them the world, and that, I suppose, was my first and greatest mistake. My wife, Martha, God rest her soul, was the soft heart to my hard edges. She was the one who smoothed things over, the one who made our house a home. When David was born 40 years ago, we looked at him as a miracle. We had tried for 10 years to have a child. When he finally arrived, he wasn't just a son. He was a prince. I wanted him to have everything I didn't. I didn't want him to have to lay brick in the July sun. I didn't want him to worry about making payroll. So we sent him to the best private schools. We bought him the cars he wanted when he turned 16. We paid for the expensive liberal arts degree that he never used. I thought I was setting him up for success. In reality, I was crippling him. I was removing the very struggle that builds character. By the time David was 30, the cracks in the foundation were already visible. He had joined the company technically. I gave him the title of Vice President of Operations. It was a vanity title. In truth, my foreman, a man named Sal who had been with me since the 80s, ran the operations. David sat in his air-conditioned office, browsing luxury watches online and taking 3-hour lunches with potential clients who never seemed to sign a contract. I tried to mentor him. I would take him to job sites, trying to show him how to read a blueprint, how to talk to the subcontractors, how to smell if a load of lumber was warped just by looking at it. David would just check his phone, sighing, wiping imaginary dust off his Italian loafers. "Dad," he would say, his voice dripping with condescension, "you're too in the weeds. We need to look at the macro level. We need to leverage our assets. We should be focusing on acquisition, not pouring driveways." He wanted the glory of the CEO title without the grit of the job. He wanted to sell the company's land assets, prime real estate I had held on to for decades, to fund high-risk development deals in markets we didn't understand. We fought constantly. But Martha was always there to mediate. She would put a hand on my arm and say, "Mitchell, be patient. He's young. He wants to make his mark. Give him time." So I gave him time, and I gave him money. When his gambling debts piled up in his mid-30s, a stock market mix-up he called it, though I knew better, I paid them off. $80,000. Gone. I told him it was a loan. He nodded, shamefaced for about 10 minutes, and then went right back to driving his Porsche as if he hadn't just burned a hole in his inheritance. Then, 3 years ago, the anchor of our lives vanished. Martha passed away from a sudden stroke. It happened in an instant. One moment she was in the kitchen making coffee, the next she was gone. The silence she left behind was deafening. The big house we had built together felt like a mausoleum, but the grief was different for David. For me, I had lost my partner, my conscience, my love. For David, he had lost his buffer. Without Martha there to soften me, my tolerance for David's incompetence evaporated, and without Martha there to shame him into behaving, David's greed became naked and aggressive. The funeral was the turning point. I remember standing by the open grave, the rain misting against my black suit, feeling like my chest had been hollowed out. David stood next to me. He was crying, yes, but he was also checking his watch. He had important people coming to the wake. A week after the funeral, David came to my study. I was sitting in the dark, staring at a picture of Martha. He walked in, turned on the lights, and sat down without asking. "Dad," he said, skipping the pleasantries, "we need to talk about the estate. Mom's share of the company." I looked at him, my eyes burning. "Your mother isn't even cold yet, David." I know, he said, waving a hand dismissively, "but business doesn't stop for grief. Mom's 50% ownership. Does that pass to me, or does it revert to the trust? Because if I have the voting shares, I have some ideas about the Ocala property. The Ocala property was 100 acres of undeveloped land I was saving. It was my rainy day fund." I stood up slowly. The rage I felt was cold and sharp. "Your mother's shares revert to me, David," I said quietly. "That is how the partnership was structured. Survivor takes all. You get nothing until I die." The look on his face was pure, unfiltered hatred. For a split second the mask slipped. He didn't see a grieving father. He saw an obstacle, a 70-year-old bottleneck standing between him and millions of dollars. That was the moment our relationship truly died. For the next 3 years, we existed in a Cold War. He still worked at the company, collecting his inflated salary, but we barely spoke. He married a woman I didn't care for, a sharp-tongued socialite named Veronica, and they had a son, Leo. Leo was the only bright spot, my grandson. He was 10 years old, with Martha's eyes and a gentle spirit that he certainly didn't get from his father. Leo loved me. He loved hearing stories about the skyscrapers I built. He loved coming over to the big empty house and helping me in the workshop. I stayed in the game for Leo. I held on to the company, refusing to retire, refusing to hand the keys over to David, because I knew David would bankrupt the business in 5 years and leave Leo with nothing. I was the dam holding back the flood of David's incompetence. And David knew it. He watched me like a hawk, waiting for a slip-up, a sign of dementia, a heart attack. Anything that would allow him to declare me unfit and take power of attorney. Then came the phone call. It was a Tuesday in late October. I was in my office, reviewing safety reports, when my cell rang. It was David. I let it ring twice, steeling myself for another argument about money or another request for a loan. "Hello, David," I answered, keeping my voice flat. "Dad," David said. His voice was different. It wasn't the usual clipped, impatient tone. It sounded warm, almost nervous. "What is it?" I asked. I've been thinking," he stammered. "About us, about everything. Since Mom died, we've been at each other's throats. And I hate it. I really hate it." I was silent. I didn't trust him. But I wanted to believe him. Every parent wants to believe their child. "I hate it too, David," I said cautiously. "I want to fix it," he said. "I want to make an effort. Look, the weather is supposed to be beautiful this weekend. Why don't we take the boat out? Just us, the men of the family, me, you, and Leo. The boat, the Martha." After Martha died, I had bought a 40-foot trawler. It was my escape pod. It was a sturdy, heavy vessel built for long-distance cruising, not for speed. I spent my weekends on it, sanding the teak, polishing the brass, navigating the intracoastal waterway. It was the only place I felt peace. David had never shown an interest in it before. He called it a slow tub and preferred his friend's cigarette boats. "You want to go out on the Martha?" I asked, surprised. "Yeah," David said. "A 3-day trip. Maybe head down to the Keys or just cruise the coast. We can fish. Leo is dying to go fishing with you. He talks about it all the time." The mention of Leo was the hook. David knew my weak spot. "I don't know, David," I said. "We have a lot of work scheduled for—" "The work can wait, Dad," he interrupted gently. "You're always working. When was the last time you spent 3 days with your grandson? Please, let's just put the business aside. No talk about the company, no talk about the will, just fishing and family. I want to start over." I closed my eyes. I felt a lump form in my throat. I was an old man, and I was lonely. I missed my son. I missed the boy he used to be before the money ruined him. "Okay," I said. "Okay, David, let's do it." "Great," he said, and I could hear the genuine relief in his voice. Or what I thought was relief. "Friday morning? We can cast off at 8 a.m. "Let's make it Friday," I agreed. "I'll prep the boat. I'll stock the galley. You just bring Leo and your fishing gear." "Deal," he said. "Thanks, Dad. Really." I hung up the phone and stared out the window at the construction yard below. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he was maturing. Maybe 40 was the turning point. Maybe he realized that family was more important than the bottom line. I spent the next 2 days in a blur of happy activity. I went to the marine supply store and bought Leo a new rod and reel, a smaller one that would fit his hands. I went to the butcher and bought the expensive ribeyes that David liked. I filled the fuel tanks. I checked the oil in the twin diesel engines. I polished the brightwork until it gleamed. I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted this trip to be the bridge that brought us back together. Friday morning arrived. It was cold for Florida, a damp, chill morning with a heavy fog that rolled off the ocean and blanketed the marina. I woke up at 4:30 a.m., unable to sleep. I was too excited. I showered, dressed in my khakis and my wool sweater, and drove to the marina in my truck. The world was gray and silent. The street lights were haloed in the mist. The marina was a ghost town at that hour. Rows of white hulls bobbed gently in the black water, the masts of sailboats clinking like wind chimes in the breeze. I parked my truck and grabbed my gear. I had a crate of fresh fruit and a bag of ice. I walked down the long wooden pier toward Slip 42, where the Martha was waiting. The air smelled of salt, low tide, and diesel fuel, the perfume of my sanctuary. The wooden planks were slick with dew, squeaking rhythmically under my boat shoes. I was about halfway down the pier when I saw him. It was odd because the marina was gated. You needed a key fob to get in, and at 5:30 a.m. there were usually no guests, just owners. And I knew most of the owners on this dock. He was sitting on a piling, facing the water, his back to me. He was wearing a yellow rain slicker that looked like it was from another era, stiff, cracked rubber, faded by years of sun and salt. He had a sou'wester hat pulled low over his head. I slowed down. I wasn't afraid exactly. I was a big man, and I had spent my life on construction sites dealing with rough characters. But there was something about the stillness of his posture that gave me pause. He looked like a statue left out in the rain. As I got closer, I could hear a soft scraping sound. Scritch, scritch, scritch. He was whittling. He had a piece of gray driftwood in one hand and a small rusted pocket knife in the other. He was carving it with slow, deliberate strokes. I walked past him, intending to give a polite nod and keep moving. "Morning," I muttered, shifting the crate of fruit in my arms. The scraping stopped. "Don't go out to sea today, Mitchell." The voice was like grinding gravel. Low, rough, and strangely clear. I stopped dead in my tracks. I turned to look at him. I had never met this man in my life. I hadn't introduced myself. My name wasn't written on my jacket. "Excuse me?" I asked, frowning. The man turned his head slowly. Under the brim of that yellow hat, his face was a landscape of deep canyons wrinkles. His skin was leathery and pale, like parchment that had been soaked in water and dried in the sun. But it was his eyes that froze the blood in my veins. They were milky blue, clouded over with cataracts. Blind eyes. "There is an unpleasant surprise waiting for you in the hold," he said. He didn't blink. He seemed to be looking right through me, staring at something on the horizon that I couldn't see. I took a step back, the hair on my arms standing up. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" He went back to whittling. "Scritch, scritch. A surprise that will put iron bars between you and the sun," he murmured to the wood. I felt a flash of irritation mix with the unease. Was this some kind of prank? Did David hire an actor to spook me? No, that didn't make sense. David wanted this trip to go smoothly. "Look, buddy," I said, my voice hardening. "I don't know who you are or how you got in here, but you need to leave. This is private property." "Check the hold, Mitchell," the old man whispered. "Before your blood gets here. Before the boy gets here." He emphasized the word boy. Leo. A chill that had nothing to do with the fog went down my spine. "What do you mean?" I demanded. "What about the boy?" But the old man said nothing more. He just kept carving that piece of driftwood, the rusty blade peeling away strips of wet wood. He seemed to have forgotten I was there. I stood there for another moment, heart hammering in my chest. I considered calling the dock master or the security guard, but something stopped me. The specificity of his words. An unpleasant surprise in the hold. Iron bars. I turned and walked briskly toward my boat, glancing back over my shoulder once. The yellow figure was still there, a splash of color in the gray mist, silent as the grave. I reached the Martha. She looked beautiful, her white fiberglass hull gleaming wetly. I stepped aboard, unlocking the cabin door with a shaking hand. I set the crate of fruit on the galley counter. The boat was quiet. The only sound was the gentle lap of water against the hull. I told myself to ignore the old lunatic. I had work to do. I needed to prep the engines. I needed to check the oil. But the words kept echoing. Check the hold. I am a creature of habit. I have a checklist. I check the bilges. I checked the seacocks. I checked the battery levels. I had checked the lazarette, the aft hold where the steering gear and extra lines are stored, 2 days ago when I fueled up. It was empty, save for the usual gear. I walked out to the aft deck. The morning light was just starting to turn the fog from black to charcoal gray. I looked down at the hatch to the lazarette. It was a flush deck hatch, secured with a hasp and a padlock. I always kept it locked because I kept expensive tools down there. I stared at the lock. My breath hitched in my throat. I used a master lock, a heavy brass one that I had bought 5 years ago. It was tarnished, with a distinct scratch on the face where I had dropped it once. The lock on the hatch now was silver. It was shiny. It was a cheap, laminated steel padlock you buy at a gas station or a 24-hour hardware store. I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me in the low light. I knelt down and touched it. The metal was cold and smooth. There was no scratch. It wasn't my lock. Someone had cut my lock off and replaced it with their own. My mind raced. A thief? Had someone broken in to steal my tools? But if they stole my tools, why would they put a new lock on? A thief leaves the hatch open and runs. They don't secure the crime scene. Only someone who wanted to hide something inside would replace the lock. Check the hold. I stood up, my knees popping. I patted my pockets for my keys, then realized with a sinking feeling that my keys wouldn't work. This was a stranger's lock. I didn't panic, not yet. I went into the main cabin, opened the engine room floorboards, and dropped down into the engine room. I grabbed the large bolt cutters I kept mounted on the bulkhead. I climbed back out and walked to the aft deck. The fog seemed thicker now, closing in around the boat like a curtain. I positioned the jaws of the bolt cutters around the shackle of the cheap silver lock. I squeezed. The metal snapped with a loud crack that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet marina. I pulled the broken lock off and threw it on the deck. I lifted the hatch handle and pulled. The heavy fiberglass hatch swung up on its gas struts. I stared down into the darkness of the hold. The lazarette is not a place for people. It is a cramped space full of hydraulic lines for the rudder, the generator exhaust, and the raw water pumps. It smells of grease and stagnation. I clicked on the small flashlight on my keychain and shone it down. There, wedged tightly behind the rudder post, where it wouldn't be seen unless you climbed all the way inside, was a black duffel bag. It was a generic gym bag, black nylon, bulging at the seams. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I had never seen this bag before. I climbed down the small ladder, twisting my body to fit into the tight space. I crouched next to the bag. I reached out and unzipped it. Inside there were 6 rectangular packages. They were wrapped in brown packing tape, dense and heavy. They looked like bricks. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, drowning out the sound of the water. Thump, thump, thump. I knew what this was. I had watched the news. I had seen the movies. I pulled a penknife from my pocket and carefully, with a trembling hand, pricked the corner of one of the bricks. A small stream of white powder trickled out onto the black nylon of the bag. I touched it with my finger. I touched it to my tongue. It was bitter, numbing, cocaine. I stared at the 6 bricks. This wasn't a recreational amount. This was kilos. This was trafficking weight. This was federal prison for the rest of your natural life weight. I sat back on my heels, hitting my head on the underside of the deck, but I didn't feel the pain. I felt a crushing weight on my chest. How? Who? I looked further into the bag. Beside the bricks, there was a small black box. I picked it up. A GPS tracker. It was blinking a steady red light. Someone was tracking this bag. And tucked into the side pocket of the bag was a crumpled piece of paper. I pulled it out. It was a receipt. It was from a Home Depot in the next town over. Dated yesterday at 8 p.m. The items listed: 1 master lock, laminated steel, 1 pair. Heavy-duty leather gloves, 1 roll brown packing tape. I looked at the bottom of the receipt. The payment method: Visa, ending in 4492. I froze. I knew that number. I had signed the corporate credit card authorization forms for that card. I reviewed the monthly statements for the company expenses. $4,492 was David's corporate card. I stared at the receipt, the numbers blurring as tears pricked my eyes. It wasn't tears of sadness. It was the physical reaction to a shock so great it disrupted my nervous system. David, my son, the family trip, the reconciliation, the sudden desire to take the boat out to sea. The pieces slammed together in my mind, forming a picture so ugly I wanted to vomit. He wasn't taking me fishing. He was making me a mule. The plan was obvious. We would go out to sea. We would cross into international waters, or maybe just get far enough out for a handover. Or maybe he wasn't planning on a handover. Maybe he was planning on a bust. If the Coast Guard boarded us, and with an anonymous tip they certainly would, They would find the drugs. They would find them in the hold of my boat, the boat I was captaining. David would claim ignorance. I'm just a passenger. My dad owns the boat. He's been acting strange lately, spending all his time alone on the water. With the drugs in my hold, I would be arrested. At 72, with this quantity, I would die in prison. And once I was a convicted felon, or at least tied up in a massive legal battle, David would petition for control of the company. He would argue that I was criminal, or senile, or both. He would take power of attorney. He would sell the Ocala land. He would gut the company. He was willing to sacrifice his own father to pay for his gambling debts and his lifestyle. And he was bringing Leo. He was bringing my 10-year-old grandson on a drug run. That was the thought that turned my shock into something else. Something cold and hard. Something like concrete. If he had just come for me, I might have been paralyzed by the betrayal. But he was endangering Leo. If things went wrong, if the dealers showed up, if there was a shootout, if the Coast Guard boarded with guns drawn, Leo would be in the crossfire. David had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I looked at my watch. It was 6:45 a.m. David and Leo were due to arrive at 8 a.m. I had an hour and 15 minutes. I looked at the drugs. I looked at the receipt. I looked at the tracker, the old man on the pier. He knew. How he knew, I didn't care. He had given me a head start. I wiped the tears from my eyes. The grandfather was gone. The construction tycoon was gone. The man in the hold was something primal. I was not going to prison, and I was not going to let David win. I needed to move the drugs. But where? If I threw them overboard, the tracker would show them in the water. David would know something was up. If I hid them in my car, and David called the police to the marina before we left, they would search the car. No. I needed the drugs to be found. But I needed them to be found in a way that David couldn't explain. I zipped the bag back up. I grabbed the handle. It was heavy. I climbed out of the hold, heaving the bag onto the deck. The fog was thick now, swirling around the boat. I was invisible to the rest of the marina. I carried the bag into the main salon of the boat. I placed it on the table. I needed a plan. A precise, architectural plan. I thought about David's habits. I thought about what he would bring. He always brought his own cooler. He was a snob about his beer. He would bring a large cooler, filled with ice. A cooler. A dark smile touched my lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a wolf who has just realized the trap is broken. I went to the galley. I found a roll of heavy-duty black trash bags. I double-bagged the bricks, wrapping them tight so they wouldn't smell, so they wouldn't leak. I sat there and waited. At 7:45 a.m., I heard the crunch of tires on gravel in the parking lot. I peeked through the curtains. David's black Range Rover pulled in. It looked sleek and ominous in the fog. David got out. He was wearing a white polo shirt and pressed khaki shorts, looking for all the world like the successful businessman he pretended to be. He looked eager, bouncy. Then Leo hopped out of the back. He was wearing a life jacket already, holding his new fishing rod. He looked so small. My heart broke all over again. I took a deep breath. This was it. I had to act natural. I had to play the part of the oblivious, loving father one last time. I stepped out onto the aft deck just as they started walking down the pier. "Ahoy there!" I called out, forcing a jovial tone that scraped against my raw throat. "Grandpa!" Leo shouted, running ahead of his father. David was dragging a large white Yeti cooler on wheels behind him. "Hey, Dad," David called out. "Ready to catch the big one?" "Born ready," I said. I watched David wheel the cooler down the dock. I watched the wheels bump over the planks. Bump, bump, bump. That cooler was my salvation, and it was his coffin. David stepped onto the swim platform of the Martha, the boat rocking gently under his weight. He looked the part of the perfect son, the perfect father. He was wearing his expensive polarized sunglasses, the kind he insisted were necessary for glare reduction, even in the dense fog. He flashed that $1,000,000 smile, the one he used to charm investors out of their savings, the one he used to convince his mother that everything was fine. "Permission to come aboard, Captain?" he asked, a playful lilt to his voice. I looked at him. I looked at the face of the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the man I had taught to shave, the executive I had tried to teach to lead. I looked for a trace of guilt. I looked for a tremor in his hand, a bead of sweat on his brow. There was nothing but a slick, superficial confidence. He was good. He was terrifyingly good at this. If I hadn't seen the contents of that black bag, if I hadn't seen the receipt with his credit card number, I would have bought it. I would have believed he wanted to reconnect. I would have walked right into the trap, smiling all the way to the penitentiary. "Permission granted," I said, my voice sounding like gravel grinding in a mixer. I cleared my throat. "Welcome aboard." Leo scrambled onto the deck, his life jacket bulky and orange, making him look like a little buoy. He ran to me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "Grandpa, did you see my rod? Dad got me a carbon fiber one." I placed a hand on his head, ruffling his hair. My hand was trembling just slightly. I hoped he didn't feel it. "I see it, Leo. It's a beauty. We're going to catch a monster with that." "A shark!" Leo yelled. "Maybe something even bigger," I said, my eyes drifting to David. David hauled the Yeti cooler onto the deck with a grunt. It landed with a heavy thud. "Heavy," I observed. David laughed, wiping his hands on his shorts. "You know me, Dad. I like to be prepared. Got some steaks in there, some of those craft beers you like, plenty of water for the kid, and a lot of ice. Can't have warm beer on a fishing trip." "No," I said. "Can't have that." He left the cooler right there on the aft deck, near the bench seating. It was perfect. It was exactly where I needed it to be. "So," David said, clapping his hands together. "Engine's warm? Charts are set? I was thinking we head south toward the Keys. Get into some deeper water." Deeper water. Of course. International waters. Or at least far enough out that federal jurisdiction kicked in. "Engine is purring," I lied. "But we have a small issue with the navigation system. I was just recalibrating it when you pulled up." David's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Is it serious?" "Just a glitch. Give me 20 minutes, I said. David checked his watch. He looked at the horizon where the fog was still thick. "Okay, 20 minutes is fine. We have time." He looked restless. He tapped his foot on the teak deck. He looked at the cooler, then at the cabin door, then at me. "Actually," David said, "if we have 20 minutes, I might run up to the marina office. That coffee I had on the drive over is doing a number on my stomach. The head on the boat is, well, you know. I prefer solid ground." It was the excuse I had been praying for. I knew David. He was fastidious. He hated boat bathrooms. And he probably wanted to step away to send a text message to whoever was waiting for us, his contact or the tip line. "Go ahead," I said, keeping my face neutral. "We aren't going anywhere yet." "Thanks, Dad. Watch Leo for me?" "With my life," I said. David jogged back down the pier, disappearing into the gray mist toward the marina clubhouse. As soon as he was gone, the clock started ticking in my head. I had maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 if he actually used the bathroom. I turned to Leo. He was fiddling with his fishing reel, tangling the line. "Leo," I said gently, "do me a favor?" "Yeah, Grandpa?" "Go down to the forward cabin, the V-berth at the very front. I put a stack of comic books on the bed for you, and a bag of that beef jerky you like." Leo's eyes lit up. "The spicy kind?" "The spicy kind. Go check it out. And close the door. I want to surprise you when we start the engines." "Okay." He scrambled down the companionway stairs. I waited until I heard the door to the forward cabin click shut. I was alone on the deck. I moved with a speed I didn't know I still possessed. I rushed into the salon where I had left the black trash bag containing the bricks. It was sitting under the chart table, hidden from view. I grabbed it. It was heavy, awkward. I ran back out to the aft deck. I knelt in front of David's white cooler. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. If he came back now, if Leo came out now. I popped the 2 rubber latches on the cooler. I threw the lid open. It was packed to the brim. Bags of ice on top. Beneath them, cans of beer, bottles of water, and packages of meat wrapped in butcher paper. I didn't have time to be gentle. I dug my hands into the freezing ice. It burned my skin, shocking my system. I scooped the ice out, throwing it onto the deck. I pulled out the beer cans, the steaks, tossing them aside frantically. I needed to get to the bottom. I hit the white plastic floor of the cooler. I grabbed the black trash bag with the drugs. I shoved it into the bottom of the cooler. It was a tight fit. The bricks were bulky. I had to rearrange them, flattening the package out so it lined the bottom of the cooler. I was breathing hard, my breath pluming in the cold air. Now, cover it. I threw the steaks back in. I threw the beer cans on top of the steaks. I shoveled the ice back in, covering everything. I looked at the deck. There was loose ice everywhere, puddles of water forming. It looked like a mess. It looked like someone had ransacked the cooler. I used my sleeve to wipe up the water. I kicked the stray ice cubes into the scuppers where they would melt and drain overboard. I closed the lid. I latched it. I stood up, my knees cracking. I looked at the cooler. It looked innocent. It looked like a cooler full of beer and meat. But underneath that layer of domestic normalcy lay 20 years of prison time. I checked my watch. 4 minutes had passed. I took a deep breath, trying to slow my heart rate. I went into the salon and sat down at the helm station. I needed to look busy. I needed to look like I was fixing a navigation glitch. I stared at the radar screen, but I wasn't seeing the green sweep of the line. I was seeing David's face. I thought about the years of tuition, the cars, the bailouts. I thought about the time he crashed his Mustang when he was 17, and I stayed up all night with him in the hospital, holding his hand, telling him it was just metal, that he was what mattered. I had loved him so much. I had loved him more than I loved myself, and he had brought cocaine onto my boat to bury me. The betrayal wasn't hot anymore. It had frozen over. It was a glacier, slow and crushing. A few minutes later, I heard the footsteps on the pier. David jogged back up the ramp. He looked relieved. He probably had sent the text. Launching in 20, get ready. He climbed aboard. He looked at the deck. He looked at the cooler. Everything good? He asked. System is rebooting, I said, coming out to the deck. Should be fine. David sat on the bench right next to the cooler. He rested his hand on the lid. I felt a surge of nausea. He was touching his own destruction, and he didn't even know it. Where's Leo? David asked. In the forward cabin, reading. Good, David said. Better he stays out from underfoot until we get underway. He looked at me, and for a second his eyes narrowed. You okay, Dad? You look pale. Just the cold, I said. And I didn't sleep well. Well, once we get out there, you can relax, David said. I'll take the wheel. You can just sit back and watch the water. I bet you'd like that, I muttered. What? I said, I bet the water is flat, I corrected myself. Dad, David said, checking his watch again. It's 8:15. Are we good to go? This was the next step. The delay. I looked up at the sky. The fog was lifting slightly, revealing a heavy, slate-gray sky. The wind was picking up, whistling through the rigging of the sailboat in the next slip. I don't know, David, I said, walking to the edge of the boat and looking at the flag snapping on the marina pole. Wind's shifting, coming from the northeast now. So? David said, an edge creeping into his voice. Northeast wind against the Gulf Stream, I said, reciting the sailor's adage. Makes for square waves, rough ride, especially for a 10-year-old who gets seasick. David stood up. The forecast said light variable winds. It's fine, Dad. Forecast changes, I said. I checked the weather radio while you were gone. Small craft advisory is in effect for this afternoon. It was a lie. A bold-faced lie. We aren't a small craft, David snapped. This is a 40-foot trawler. It can handle a little chop. The boat can handle it, I said, crossing my arms. Leo can't. I'm not going to have him puking his guts out for 6 hours just so we can fish. David took a step toward me. His face was flushing red. The mask of the happy sun was slipping, revealing the desperate man beneath. Dad, we are going, he said. His voice was low, threatening. We planned this. I took off work. Leo is excited. We are not canceling because of a little wind. I'm the captain, I said calmly. It's my call. We wait. If it clears by noon, we go. If not, we eat the steaks here at the dock and go home. No! David shouted. It was too loud, too aggressive. He realized it immediately and lowered his voice, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. Dad, come on. Please, for me. I really need this trip. I need to clear my head. Why? I asked, looking him dead in the eye. What's wrong, David? Is there something you're running from? He flinched. No, just work stress. You know how it is. I do know how it is, I said. I built the company, remember? Stress is part of the job. You don't run away from it. You deal with it. Just start the engine, Dad, he hissed. No. We stood there on the deck, a standoff between father and son. The air was thick with tension. He was desperate. If we didn't leave the dock, his plan fell apart. The Coast Guard wouldn't raid a boat sitting in a marina slip unless they had a very specific warrant. He needed us in transit. He needed the narrative of the drug run. If we stayed here, he was stuck with the drugs, and he couldn't take them back off the boat now without me seeing. He was trapped. I watched his eyes dart around. He was calculating. He was thinking about how to force my hand. Would he hit me? Would he try to take the keys? I was ready for him. I had a heavy wrench in my back pocket. It broke my heart to think I might have to use it on my own son, but I was ready. Then I saw it. Through the break in the fog, rolling slowly through the parking lot. A blue and white Ford Explorer with a light bar on top. A police cruiser. It wasn't a raid. It wasn't a SWAT team. It was just a local patrol car doing the morning rounds, checking for vagrants or break-ins. But to David, it must have looked like the angel of death. I saw his body stiffen. He went rigid. His eyes locked onto the cruiser. "Why are they here?" he whispered. The color drained from his face, leaving it pasty and gray. "Who?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "The police. Why is a cop car here?" "They patrol the marina every morning, David. Relax." "No," he said, backing away from the rail. "No, they shouldn't be here. Not now." His reaction confirmed everything. If the drugs were where he thought they were, in the hidden compartment of the hold, he would be calm. He would know they were safe from a casual glance. He would know that a beat cop walking the dock wouldn't have probable cause to tear the boat apart. But he was panicking. Why? Because he had a guilty conscience? Or, a sudden thought struck me. Did he have something else on him? Or did he just realize that if the police stopped to talk to us and asked for ID, or ran our names, his whole timeline would be screwed up? Or maybe he thought I had called them. He turned to me, his eyes wide and wild. "Did you call them?" "Why would I call them, David?" I asked. "I don't know. You've been acting weird all morning." The police car stopped at the top of the ramp. A young officer got out. He adjusted his belt and started walking down the pier, looking at the boats. He was just drinking coffee and stretching his legs. But David was vibrating. "We need to leave," David said. "Right now. Cast off the lines. I'll drive." He moved toward the helm. "David, stop," I said. "Cast off the lines," he screamed. That scream was a mistake. The officer on the pier heard it. He looked up. He saw two men arguing on the deck of the 40-foot trawler. He saw the aggression. The officer started walking faster toward us. This was it, the moment of truth. I could let David take the boat out. I could let him run. I could let him destroy himself at sea. But Leo was downstairs. I couldn't risk a high-speed chase. I couldn't risk a standoff on the water. It had to end here, on the dock. I took a step to the rail. I raised my hand. "Officer!" I shouted. "Over here!" David spun around, grabbing my arm. His grip was painful, his fingernails digging into my skin through my sweater. "Shut up," he hissed. "Dad, shut up. Don't talk to him." "Get your hands off me," I said, ripping my arm away. I was stronger than I looked. Years of hauling lumber don't leave you, even at 72. The officer was jogging now. He reached our slip. He put a hand on his holstered taser. "Everything all right here, gentlemen?" the officer asked. He was young, maybe 25. He looked authoritative but cautious. "No, officer," I said, my voice steady. "Everything is not all right." "Dad?" David pleaded, his voice cracking. "Don't, please. He's having an episode, officer. My father is... He's confused. He has dementia. We were just leaving." "I do not have dementia," I said clearly. "My name is Mitchell. I am the owner of this vessel, and I want this man off my boat." The officer looked between us. He saw the fear in David's eyes. He saw the cold resolve in mine. "Sir," the officer said to David, "step off the boat, please. Let's separate for a second." "We're going on a trip," David stammered. "My son is downstairs. We're just going fishing." "I found something," I interrupted. "I found something on my boat this morning, something that doesn't belong to me." David froze. He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and horror. He thought I was talking about the hold. He was waiting for me to point to the hatch. "What did you find, sir?" the officer asked, stepping onto the gunwale of the boat. I pointed a shaking finger. Not at the hatch. I pointed at the white Yeti cooler. "That," I said. "He brought it aboard. He says it's beer. But I think you should look inside." David let out a breath. He actually laughed. It was a jagged, hysterical sound. "The cooler?" David said, looking at the officer with incredulous eyes. "He's crazy. It's just beer and steaks. I swear to God. Look, I'll show you." David was so relieved. He thought I was senile. He thought I had just picked a random object to obsess over. He thought the drugs were safe in the hold, and that by opening the cooler, he would prove I was crazy and the police would leave. He walked over to the cooler. He undid the latches. "See?" David said, throwing the lid open. "Ice, beer, meat." He looked at me with a smirk. "See, Dad? It's just lunch." The officer peered into the cooler. "Mind if I check, sir?" "Go ahead," David said, stepping back, crossing his arms. "Help yourself." The officer leaned in. He moved a package of ribeyes. He shifted a few cans of IPA. He dug his hand down into the ice. David was watching him smugly. Then the officer stopped. He frowned. He felt something at the bottom. He pulled harder. The ice shifted with a crunching sound. The black trash bag surfaced, slick and wet. David's smirk vanished. His mouth fell open. "What's this?" the officer asked. He ripped the plastic open. The brown packing tape was visible. The distinct brick-like shape. The officer knew immediately. "You don't work patrol in Florida without knowing what a kilo of cocaine looks like." He dropped the bag back into the cooler and drew his service weapon. "Hands!" the officer screamed. "Let me see your hands, both of you, now!" David stared at the cooler. He stared at the bag. He couldn't process it. His brain was misfiring. That's not mine, he whispered. That was in the hold. Why is it in the cooler? He looked at me. And in that moment he understood. He saw the look on my face. I wasn't the confused old man anymore. I was the architect. I was the man who had laid the trap. You, David gasped. You moved it. Get on the ground, the officer yelled into his radio. Dispatch, I need backup at the marina. I have a large quantity of narcotics found. Suspects at gunpoint. Dad, David screamed, lunging toward me. You set me up. You crazy old bastard. You set me up. I didn't move. I stood my ground as the officer tackled David. They hit the deck hard. The cooler tipped over, spilling ice, beer, and bricks of cocaine across the beautiful teak deck I had spent so many hours sanding. David was thrashing, screaming obscenities, crying. He's crazy. He planted it. It's his boat. Check the hold. Check the hold. But nobody was listening to him. The door to the forward cabin opened. Leo stood there, holding a comic book, his eyes wide with terror. Grandpa? Leo whimpered. Dad? I turned away from the sight of my son being handcuffed. I walked over to Leo. I blocked his view with my body. It's okay, Leo, I said, my voice breaking for the first time. It's okay. Go back inside. Put your headphones on. Grandpa will handle this. I ushered him back into the cabin and closed the door. I leaned my forehead against the fiberglass door. I listened to the sirens approaching in the distance. I felt old. I felt tired. But I was free. And Leo was safe. The nightmare was just beginning for David, but for me, the storm had finally broken. The next few hours were a blur of flashing lights, yellow tape, and uniformed officers swarming my sanctuary. I was separated from David immediately. They put him in the back of a cruiser. He was kicking the window, screaming until his voice gave out. I sat on the bench on the pier, wrapped in a shock blanket they had given me, though I wasn't cold. I was numb. A detective approached me. Detective Miller. He was a sharp-eyed man with a graying mustache. Mr. Mitchell? He asked. Yes. We need to ask you some questions. About the drugs found on your boat. I'll tell you everything, I said. But first, my grandson. He's inside the boat. He's scared. I need to get him home. Child Protective Services is on the way, Miller said. No, I said firmly. I am his grandfather. I am his legal guardian if his father is incapacitated. I have the paperwork at my house. He comes with me. Miller looked at me. He saw a man who wasn't going to budge. Okay, he said. We'll let you take the boy. But you come straight to the station after you drop him off. We have a lot to discuss. I have nothing to hide, I said. And I didn't. Not really. I had moved the evidence, yes, but I hadn't planted it. I had just rearranged the furniture in the room my son had built. I drove Leo to my house. I told him his dad was in trouble, that he had made some bad mistakes, but that I would take care of him. Leo cried, but he trusted me. We made hot chocolate. I put him to bed in the guest room. I called my housekeeper to come watch him. Then I drove to the police station. The interrogation room was cold. Stainless steel table, two-way mirror. Detective Miller sat across from me. He placed a recorder on the table. So, Miller said, David claims the drugs are yours. He claims you're a kingpin. He says you framed him because you're, and I quote, a senile, vindictive old tyrant. I didn't laugh. It wasn't funny. Detective, I said, I am 72 years old. I have a construction business worth $40 million. Why would I be moving 10 kilos of cocaine in a fishing boat? People do strange things for money, Miller said. But let's look at the facts. The drugs were in a cooler David brought aboard. Yes. But David claims they were originally in the lazarette, the hold. Why would he know what was in my hold? I asked. Unless he put it there. Miller paused. That was the logic trap. He says you moved them. How would I know they were there to move them? I asked. If I was the drug dealer, why would I put them in his cooler? Why wouldn't I just keep them hidden in the hold where they were safe? Why would I expose them in a portable container right before the police arrived? Miller nodded slowly. It doesn't make sense for a smuggler to do that. It makes sense for someone who is panicking, or someone who is being framed. Exactly, I said. Then I reached into my pocket. Detective, I want to give you something. I pulled out the crumpled receipt I had found in the duffel bag. I found this in the trash, I lied. It was a small lie. It's a receipt from Home Depot, dated yesterday, for a padlock, gloves, and packing tape. Miller took the receipt. He looked at it. And here, I said, sliding the broken silver padlock across the table. This was on my hatch this morning. It's not my lock. I had to cut it off. The receipt shows a purchase of this exact lock. Miller looked at the lock, then at the receipt. The card number, Miller muttered. Last 4 digits, 4492. That's David's corporate card, I said softly. You can check the records. Miller looked up at me. The suspicion in his eyes was replaced by something else. Pity? Respect? He bought the lock to secure the drugs in your boat, Miller surmised. He was setting you up. He wanted the company, I said. He wanted me in prison so he could sell everything. Miller sat back in his chair. That's cold. That's ice cold. He's my son, I said, staring at the table. I failed him. I gave him too much. I never let him fail. So he never learned that actions have consequences. He's learning now, Miller said. Detective, I said, there's one more thing. What? The bag, the duffel bag the drugs were in. David says I planted them, but if you check the tape, the packing tape on the bricks, or the inside of the bag, I think you'll find his prints, not mine. I knew David. He was lazy. He wouldn't have worn gloves when he was packing the bag in the comfort of his own garage. He only bought the gloves to handle the lock and the dirty boat hatch. Miller made a note. We'll check. They did check, and that was the final nail in David's coffin. The forensics came back 2 days later. My prints weren't on the bricks. I had handled the bag, yes, but only the outside. David's prints were on the adhesive side of the tape wrapping the cocaine. His DNA was on the rim of the water bottle found inside the duffel bag. And, as the unpleasant surprise that the old man had warned me about kept giving, there was a third set of prints. A man named Carlos Little C. Mendez, a known mid-level distributor for the cartel in Miami. The police connected the dots. David had gambling debts, massive ones. He had borrowed money from Mendez. Mendez wanted repayment. David offered him a solution. Use his father's boat for a shipment, and as a bonus, let the father take the fall so David could liquidate the construction company and pay back the debt with interest. It was a perfect plan, except for one thing: me and the ghost on the pier. David was denied bail. The flight risk was too high, and the quantity of drugs carried a mandatory minimum. He was looking at 20 to 30 years. I went to see him once. Just once. It was a week after the arrest. He was in the county jail, wearing an orange jumpsuit that washed out his complexion. He looked like a stranger. We spoke through the glass on a telephone. "Dad," he said. His voice was trembling. "Dad, you have to help me. You have to tell them." "Tell them what, David?" "Tell them you did it. You're old. You'll get house arrest. They'll kill me in here, Dad. I'm not built for this." "No," I said. "You're not. Please, I'm your son." "My son died a long time ago," I said calmly. "You're just a man who tried to send his father to die in a cage." "I was desperate. I owed money. So you decided to sell my life to pay for yours?" He sobbed. He slammed his fist against the glass. "I hate you. I hope you die alone." "I won't be alone," I said. "I have Leo." David stopped crying. He stared at me. Leo, you can't take him. I already have, I said. I filed for emergency custody. Veronica is in rehab again. You're in here. The judge granted it this morning. He's my son. And I'm going to raise him to be a man, I said. A man who works for what he has. A man who honors his family. A man who would never do what you did. I stood up to leave. Dad, he screamed. Dad, don't walk away. I hung up the phone. I didn't look back. I walked out of the jail into the bright, blinding Florida sun. The air tasted sweet. I got in my truck and drove to the marina. The Martha was gone. I had sold her the day before. I couldn't step foot on her again. She was tainted. But I walked down the pier one last time. I walked to the end, to the piling where I had seen him. The fog was gone. The sky was blue. Captain Eli? I whispered to the empty air. There was no answer, just the cry of a seagull and the lap of the water. I spoke to the dockmaster on the way out, an old salt named Jerry. Jerry, I asked, you ever see an old guy hanging around here? Yellow slicker? Blind in both eyes? Jerry stopped sweeping the deck. He looked at me funny. You mean old Captain Eli? That's the one. Mitchell, Jerry said, leaning on his broom. Captain Eli died in the storm of '78, drowned right off this pier trying to save his boat. They say he haunts the marina, warns sailors when bad luck is coming. I felt a chill, but it wasn't fear. It was gratitude. Well, I said, if you see him, tell him I said thanks. Jerry laughed. I'll do that. I drove home. Leo was in the driveway, shooting hoops with a new basketball I had bought him. Grandpa, he yelled when he saw me. Watch this shot. He threw the ball. It bounced off the rim and rolled into the grass. Close, I yelled. Keep trying. It's all about the follow-through. He ran to get the ball, laughing. I stood there watching him. My son had tried to bury me. But in doing so, he had given me a second chance at fatherhood. I wouldn't make the same mistakes with Leo. I wouldn't shield him from the world. I would teach him to build. I would teach him to be strong. And I would make sure he knew that the most important foundation of all is the truth. I am Mitchell. I am 72 years old, and my life is just beginning. Thank you for listening to this story. Family betrayal is a wound that never fully heals, but sometimes justice is the only medicine that works. What do you think? Did Mitchell do the right thing by letting David take the fall? Or should a father always protect his son, no matter what? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of revenge and redemption. Until next time.
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales like this, hit subscribe.